on Radio 4, Time for Action with Nick Ross and Roger Cook.
This is something of an experiment in broadcasting. It offers the chance for people who are not professional broadcasters to present their side of a controversial issue.
But it's not an access programme in the fashionable sense. In this programme, each side of the issue is presented with the help of a professional reporter, me, Nick Ross,
and me, Roger Cook,
leaving the protagonists free to make the points they want to make, in their own way, in their own surroundings, and giving them the last word.
The issue at stake is a proposed motorway across the Potteries and the clash of interests between those who want it
and those who don't.
I am determined to keep fighting on it until we get this motorway for the sake of the health of those who live on this road. Because, believe me, only those who live with it know what it's like.
We certainly had no choice but to oppose the route itself. But, of course, it's no good having a local support and say, well, we don't want a motorway because it will spoil my house or your house. You've got to have such an appeal to everybody that they'll say, well, this is all wrong, you know. Why should they do that to these people?
Between the two giant motorways that link the north and south of England, the M1 and the M6, is a narrow, winding road, often little more than a country lane, the A50. It runs east-west through the North Midlands countryside from Stoke-on-Trent to Derby, and halfway along its length, it slices through the once peaceful villages of Tean and Checkley. For 40 years, the people who live here have been promised a bypass and, more recently, a motorway to end this tyranny by traffic.
But, as you'll hear from me, Nick Ross, later in the programme, salvation for Tean and Checkley could well be purgatory for the two villages just further west, Tittenser and Barlaston. For if Tean and Checkley get the motorway they want, the chances are it would run through Tittenser and Barlaston and run through them and the countryside around on great big concrete stilts.
We've spent several days in each of the two sets of villages recording just what the people wanted to tell us about their anger, sometimes their apathy, and frequently their sense of frustration. I'm Roger Cook, and I've been to Tean and Checkley.
10 this morning at the recreation ground in Tean. Come and support the Action for M64 group. Support the Action for M64 group.
The 3,000 people who live around Tean and Checkley are being encouraged to go to a public meeting this morning up on the recreation ground at the top of the High Street. The M64 Action Group, it must be one of the very few such groups actually in favour of a motorway, having recently returned from a fruitless journey down to London to beg the Department of the Environment to end those 40 years of misery, wants to keep spirits up and the campaign going.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you all to this meeting on behalf of the Action for M64 group. We've got some very good speakers here today. We've got our Member of Parliament, David Knox. We've got a County Councillor. We've got the Chairman...
Now, I've been interested in the building of the M64 ever since I became Member of Parliament for this constituency almost 6 years ago. And throughout these 6 years, it was accepted by successive ministers that this thing would be built. And yet, we went along and we then found, for the first time, that the whole thing was under question again.
It's accepted that this is the worst road in the whole country. I feel we're being treated like idiots, we're being fobbed off, and because we're peaceable country people, we're just being ignored.
I've heard a lot of people speaking about we want a bypass. Well, we don't want half measures, and this is what it would mean if you get a bypass. So for God's sake, don't close heart. Don't give in and say, well, we shall never get it.
Those dismal Jimmies and the Jeremiahs and the prophets of doom, we don't want to know them, because we as an action group are determined to get this motorway and get it soon. The people in places like Tittenser and Barlaston don't want the M64, and I can see why. They are going to suffer, perhaps to some extent, what we have been suffering for many, many years. Is there anything else you would like us to do? Do you feel there's anything further we could do?
Everybody in Tean's got to get together. On a wet day here, what happens in Tuxford Road and the High Street? You live in dread and fear of something coming through your front door.
But it never used to be like that. When Teens Hall Mill, which dominates the village, began making cotton ribbons 229 years ago, the road looked much the same, with a row of tiny red brick houses hugging either side. But then a dozen vehicles a day was average. Now, however, the number has grown to well over 3.5 million a year, and the Belisha beacons outside the mill were knocked down twice before they'd even finished painting the stripes on the pedestrian crossing. Teens' backbone is its straggling 18-foot wide high street with a sharp bend at one end. And the endless stream of heavy commercial traffic using it is breaking the village's back. But if you get away from the road, out in the fields behind the village, you can get something of the feel of the place as it used to be before the juggernauts came. The old folk will be delighted to help you, people like 75-year-old Mrs. Maud Cook, 72-year-old Ethel Bostock and her family, who run the village hardware store cum garage, and Helena Slater, just turned 77. Reminiscences and good humour almost seem to be a form of escape.
Well, it was very, very peaceful and very, very nice, you know. We used to go school with the hoops in the morning in the road, one side and one the other, right across the road, skipping right up to Dean's school. And we used to play marbles, middle of the road, by lamplight, gaslight. We had gas in the village then. But it was really peaceful. Mind you, I shouldn't like to go back to them times, not really.
Everything's altered in Teens, doesn't like it used to be. It used to be a lovely place. I've worked at the mill, you know, since I was 13. And then when I was 70, I finished. It's different altogether now, Teen is.
Started playing whip and top at the corner, Johnson's shop at the corner,
Yeah.
Boys have when we've come out of school, and we've gone right to Drake at Arms and come back again. Never been moved off the road. That was when I was 12. The only two cars in Teen was Dr. Brownridge and Dr. Brown.
Times moved on and Teen stood still in some ways.
Oh, yes.
You know, the road really is still only as wide as it was in them days in places. Isn't it? Really, Harry?
Yes.
It was made for horse and carts and it's still the same width now.
Oh, yes, it was.
But, you know, Teen's got its compensations with the greenery around it. Now, if I go down our garden path, it's most beautiful at the back. The little lambs this morning, they're barring all over the place. Then there's the brook, and then over there there's the greenery again up to the farm. You can see to Lee. You know, I've often thought I'd like to move because of the traffic, but when I go down and look across the fields, I think it's lovely. And the little lambs there this morning, they're running after the mothers, 3 little ones to 1 big sheep. Oh, it was lovely this morning, Harry.
Well, you can't
See?
buy that. Money can't, can you?
can't.
Money can't buy it, you see, can it?
So that, at the back, has always kept me from going because I think of the beauty at the back, despite all the noise.
I don't like all this traffic, certainly not. I'm that nervous they come. You see, one comes this way, one comes the other way. They almost touch you as they go past them great big lorries, you know. And then when it's wet, ooh. Twice they've knocked the porch off. I was in bed both times when I got up in the morning. Neighbour knocked at the door and she said, your porch is all down again. But the second time, the man did leave an address to say he'd knocked it down.
What happened, Harry? Oh, it shook me out of bed, that was it. It shook me
yes,
out
that
of bed,
morning.
didn't it, that morning?
Yes.
And I got up and I thought, well, somebody's had a bump, and I got into bed again. But when I heard voices talking in the kitchen, I was a bit afraid, and I went down, and it was men in. And I opened the living room door, and the lorry shone on me, sort of thing. It was inside, up to the grate. Great big lorry, wasn't it, Harry?
Yeah.
Did you see it?
Yes.
Yes. So I made him a nice cup of tea. And he did enjoy it.
It's surprising, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
I
you
was
all at
so
once, you know.
thankful, you know. Of course, the police were soon there and that. And they eventually got the lorry out for dinner time, you know, lunchtime.
I remember coming home on holiday, I should think it's 35 years ago. My brother says to me, I'll take you along the cricket field there to look where they've pegged the new road that's coming. And he did, it was all pegged out. That was 35 years ago, nothing's been done. Not a thing, as you know.
So things have kept on going, bump in the night and all through the day as well. So often that the local police inspector says that people don't bother to report them anymore. Sometimes the damage is no more than a broken window or a few loose bricks, and sometimes, as May Capel recalls, the experience is nothing short of apocalyptic.
We went to bed, you know, as usual, and thought that everything was all right, when all at once this terrific noise, crash, I couldn't imagine really what it was. It didn't sound or seem like an ordinary crash that we'd had before. It seemed more or less like an earthquake. And all that I could do was get underneath the bedclothes and hope for the best, while all the roof and everything came falling down. I heard a voice, my husband's voice, shouting, "Are you all right?" He tried to get from the back, and there was nothing there. I didn't know at the time, but my bed was actually on the vehicle underneath. Of course, when they moved the vehicle, you see, the whole thing just collapsed altogether. And we found we'd no home, nowhere to go, nothing. We had to start again from scratch.
You can easily replace a building, of course, but not a child. And most local mothers worry incessantly about where their children are playing, or even if they'll get to school safely. Headmaster Stanley Cookson shares those fears.
Well, Checkley School's right on the road, and the children are allowed in the playground, but there's always anxiety about it, of course. There's an excellent playing space at the front of the school with a very fine sand pit, but I don't allow them to use it. There have been vehicles through the fence near the schoolhouse, and it's always a worry. This could happen at any time. I lived in the schoolhouse and came here to take over the headship of this school. We've now left. I think there'd have been a separation. I mean, I'd been in the schoolhouse, my wife would have been in a lunatic asylum.
The road's fairly dangerous. Every time you walk across it, there's lorries shooting about the lot. There's big articulated lorries and wide loads come through as well. Once, Michael bossed up my friend. He was walking across this crossing and he nearly got run over. It takes me about 5 minutes to get across, and there's a bend, and I don't like walking all the way down the road and crossing across zebra because it takes a long time, and the lorries never stop for you. They go past the corner very fast, and yesterday I saw a lorry on the pavement, and it should have been on the road.
I think that the school would probably have been moved, I get this impression, except so many promises have been given over the years about the road that they thought it would be unnecessary, rather like having an aching tooth, and you don't have the tooth removed because you hope that the pain will go, but this hasn't happened.
It isn't easy to teach in the face of all that traffic, and it isn't easy to carry on a business either, as Pat McGarry will tell you. His grocery shop is literally inches from the wheels of passing lorries, and his customers, sometimes worried about the effect the fumes may have on their groceries, often can't make themselves heard.
At times I'm on the other side of the counter, I get customers coming in, and I can't make out what they say. I have to just repeat to them, excuse me, what did you say, you know, and invariably look at your little gone out. Well, little boy who's only 4, ever since he's been able to talk, has always said one sentence, last thing at night. Night, night, Daddy, night, night, Mummy. No breaking sounds tonight. He's terrified of the lorries, you know, when they start braking.
Young Master McGarry is often kept awake by some of the 300 heavy lorries that thunder out of Croxton Quarries just up the road 24 hours a day. Not surprisingly, the company, in the person of John Hodkinson, is very much in favour of a motorway too.
I feel very, very sorry for the people locally, really, when you think that the vehicles are shaking their properties as they're travelling past them. We have, of course, the largest single gravel quarry in Europe, and if we're going to shift 5,000 tonnes per day for up to 40 years, I'm damn certain that the local people will want to get rid of us. We've looked into all means of helping the local residents. We've looked at the question of rail transport. There's no such thing available, because when we asked the railways for
rates. The rates are far and above what allows us to be competitive. And I think the only way that, in fact, we can help these poor people on the side of the roads is to cut back on our output. This, of course, means that it'll also cut back on the employment of labour at Croxton. And this is the last thing that we want, because we employ local people.
And tonight, the locals are down at the local in the bar of the White Hart, reviewing this morning's meeting.
Well, I didn't go to the meeting.
Why?
Well, why? Well, I was in bed. I know it's no excuse. I mean, that's it's same as everybody else.
I mean, I wanted to stay in bed.
I could be same as what a lot of people say. Oh, well, we don't live in the main street, see, so it doesn't affect us. But it's a wrong attitude to take, isn't it?
It's the same in the elections or anything. People are just apathetic. They don't seem to bother. But if it directly involved them, you know, if a lorry had gone through their house, then they will be bothered.
The whole problem is, though, that just now we've been going on for over a year and people are getting bored with it. They're seeing no activity. I think the government are waiting for us to go off the boil so that we'll forget about it.
I went shopping with the wife this morning, getting the groceries, and we called in one certain shop. And this fella says, he said, there's one way of making your presence felt. I says, what's that? He says, well, one dark early morning, he says, he wants about half a dozen lorry loads of gravel shot up at that end of the street, and half a dozen loads of gravel shot up this end of the street. He said, that'll hold them up for a bit. Take them a while to shift that little lad.
If the people of Barliston could come and live on this road for a week, they'd understand all our problems and everything that we have to put up with, the dirt, the noise and everything.
I don't know about the people of Barliston coming to live down here. I think you want to get some of these from Whitehall and the big places. We'd soon have a road then.
All the posh people live at Barliston, where it's very quiet. And they don't know what it's like. I mean, anybody can oppose something if they don't know what it's like.
Those, then, are the views volunteered by the residents of Tean and Checkley. A dozen miles away, Nick Ross has been getting the views of the residents of Tittenser and Barliston.
This is Tittenser's pub, the Wing House, and judging by what you've already heard from Tean and Checkley, the residents of those two villages might be surprised at what's being said here. The fact is, Barliston and Tittenser aren't all posh, and a few of the people here seem to have more sympathy with Tean and Checkley than with some of their more immediate neighbours.
The reason it's everybody's up in arms is because it's somebody with money that's creating. I mean, some of these people that they've been having meetings in the village hall, we've never seen them in the village before. They've never had nothing to do with the village. I mean, they want the village to back them up. They want to come in the village beforehand and then ask them to back them up afterwards.
You must remember at the Wing House, the bar is made up of working class bloke. 8, 9, 10 of them. But it doesn't affect the working class, because they're not interested anyway. It doesn't affect them at all. Whereas the middle class is more bothered about his money, his property.
Well, we're the ordinary working class people and we don't agree with that. I reckon he'll spoil the countryside anyway. You'll have a motorway on stilts all across the road, you know.
There's some beautiful countryside around here, and it really does seem a damn shame to go spoiling it with a ruddy great big motorway.
Build a bypass down Tean and leave us alone. Simple as that.
And it is as simple as that for most of the villagers of Tittenser and Barliston. They simply can't understand why Tean and Checkley are so insistent about having a motorway when surely a bypass would suffice. A bypass wouldn't harm anyone, while a motorway would desecrate the countryside for miles. For one thing, it would spur off the existing M6 only half a mile or so from the back windows of Roy Nixon's house. He's secretary of the action group at Tittenser.
Our contention and the contention of our committee all along since we started this has been that there is no need for the M64. I think the villages of Tean and Checkley are being duped because the road which they are proposing to bring through the M64, I think, is being brought through mainly to take the heavy traffic away from the north of Birmingham. The heavy traffic which at the moment comes through Coventry onto the M6 and into Staffordshire north of Birmingham is a very, very heavy traffic. And I think the villages of Tean are being duped thinking that the M64 or the proposed M64 is going to help them. Because I think that when the M64 is built, if it is ever built, they are still going to have a 1930 road taking 1980s traffic, and it's still going to go through their village. Bypasses around Teen and Checkley would totally solve their problem.
Well, for Tittenser and Barlaston, a motorway would be the last straw. Barlaston is a tidy, prosperous garden village of some 3,500 souls, many of whom work at the famous Wedgwood potteries nearby, while most of the rest commute each day to Stoke. Tidy, prosperous Barlaston, and so far quiet as well. But in the last 20 years, the villagers have suffered a good deal. A power station was built on one side, a sewage plant on the other. And as if that wasn't enough, 5 years ago, new coal workings were driven beneath the village and caused subsidence to some of the houses. Thus, hemmed in and undermined, the people of Barlaston are in no mood now to be blighted from the air by a motorway on stilts. As for Tittenser, it's suffered from roadways quite enough already. It's not just the M6 half a mile away. The A34, now a dual carriageway, slices the growing village in half. Chairman of the Action Group, a cheerful and friendly teacher and local church warden, Malcolm Johnson.
Well, of course, the village was quite small originally. In fact, when I first came to the village, there were villagers who could describe how travelling circuses and so on had stopped in the village and had entertained the villagers with their dancing bears and so on, and had a little collection where the village trough was. And in fact, the farmer used to say how he had driven the cattle along the main road. But of course, this would be impossible now with the heavy traffic that we have. It has retained its character. The one nice thing about the village is that if you're walking down the street and you meet someone, you speak to them. In a town, people think, you know, you were mad. Then, of course, in recent years, we've had a major modern housing, private housing development. And at that stage, a village pub was built. Otherwise, hitherto, we had no meeting place. Consequently, the real centre of the village has always been the church. And many of the organisations and meetings are organised by the church and through the church.
Morning, how are you? Oh, all right, thanks. All good. Pretty well. Very nice.
My role is a little bit mixed. I suppose as the vicar, people say, well, I should be only concerned with the church and church services. Well, that's not how I see it. And Christianity is concerned with people's quality of life, I suppose, as a whole thing. I think, in fact, that my standards, my values of Christianity give me a great deal of sympathy with the folk at Teen and Checkley, for example, who are saying, we must have the motorway.
When we thought it was imminent, we did in fact canvass the whole village, and I should think over 90% of villagers supported the opposition to the motorway along its route. Though it was said in public by many people that they didn't want to adopt the attitude of forcing it onto someone else. It wasn't a case of we don't want it, you can have it.
People are important. I remember reading a book many years ago called People Matter More Than Things. And I think that's what we're really saying about the motorway. If it's got to come, let's make sure it doesn't damage people.
There were events happening in the village which really we knew nothing about, such as mysterious men with theodolites examining the landscape and helicopters flying up and down. And, you know, things happen like that almost everywhere, I think, in the country these days, and we just took it as a natural event until one of our neighbours in Barlaston, Mr. Plant, came along and informed us that, in fact, this village was to be very close to what was a major motorway project, the M64. And it was then, to our amazement, that we found that they'd actually marked the route with concrete stakes and so on. And really, it had happened and we knew nothing at all about it.
About 3 years ago, I was driving down this road and I saw a white painted post stuck in the hedgerow. This looked rather suspicious, and in the end, I walked on and off about 9 miles from the M6 eastward and counted 36 of these posts, all in a line, which was suspiciously the line of the M64. And so we started making inquiries from the Department of the Environment and Staffordshire County Council. Both refused to acknowledge the position of these posts or that they had anything to do with the M64. But the more it's gone on and the more evidence we've had, the more certain we are that this is actually what, at that time, the Department of the Environment pegged out as the route of the M64 in the western section.
And if John Plant there is right, then the picture windows of Reg Hill's house will soon rattle to the sounds of earth movers and pile drivers down at the bottom of his garden.
We've been here 6 years. We bought this piece of ground. We worked really damned hard putting this place up, and incidentally we've done 3 parts of it ourselves. And now we find that we're going to get a motorway within approximately 100 yards from the edge of my ground at high level. And looking through my lounge window as you see it now, it's just beautiful, isn't it? We're looking down into a valley, a nice free-flowing stream, clean water, looking right up onto the horizon there with open fields, beautiful trees, beautiful farmland, and in the summertime there's cattle grazing there. It's, well, to me, you just can't replace it. This is the reason we came here. And if they get their way, it's going to come at high level. Always will see us concrete stilts. The noise will be absolutely out of this world, ridiculous. And it'll be, as a value, practically nil.
There's no financial compensation, incidentally, if the motorway doesn't actually cross your land. About the same prospect faces Graham and Jean Jeffs about a mile further down, what they think is the most likely route.
I've always felt very sorry for people who have to live near motorways, and I hope that we won't have to stay here if one does get built at the back of us.
And we've had this overhanging us in this village for about 3 years, but we still don't know a line. Our next door neighbours left because of this. The people who moved in later were very annoyed when they found out about it. We have a sort of blight over the whole area at the moment.
And so it is that Tiddenser and Barlaston are fed up with all the waiting, all the guessing, all the uncertainty, and they want to get the whole motorway issue resolved. They're also a bit fed up with and puzzled by the hostility they've met from Tean and Checkley, as the action group leaders Roy Nixon and Malcolm Johnson describe.
When the Tean and Checkley villagers first started their campaign in the local press and so forth, I wrote a letter to the Evening Sentinel, which was published, suggesting that what we wanted was bypasses built which would take traffic straight away from their villages. And I thought that we weren't in conflict with each other, that we could work together. And I subsequently had a telephone call from their secretary, and it was rejected. And since then we've had no contact with them whatsoever.
Certainly there's no hostility from Tiddenser. We treat the whole thing as a joke, actually. We feel that they have been used. And you see, the whole thing is that when they first started grumbling about their traffic problem, they were told by the Department of the Environment that there would be no improvement on the A50 until the M64 had been built. And we feel this has diverted their attention from the obvious solution to their problem. And we feel that it was probably done by the Department of the Environment simply to create this opposition, anticipating that if there was a public inquiry and public participation into this motorway, it would probably look better for the department to have people who wanted a motorway to counter the ones who particularly were opposing it. So obviously it pleased them. It certainly doesn't please me.
So Tiddenser and Barlaston sympathise with Tean and Checkley and are happy to campaign for them to get a bypass. But why Tean and Checkley are so obstinate about having a motorway remains a mystery.
A mystery to them, perhaps, but not to Tean and Checkley. Norman Heathcote, chairman of the Checkley Parish Council.
I don't think Barlaston could care less about us. They're just working for their own ends. And why they should support us on getting a bypass, I don't know. In that case, you've got to suspect people.
Whatever their differences, though, both groups of villagers feel very much the same about their frustrating fight with bureaucracy. The people who, depending on your point of view, are either promising them a motorway or threatening them with it.
In Tittenser and Barlaston, they've learned to articulate their grievances very well. Getting them heard is another matter. The Tittenser Action Group leaders, Malcolm Johnson, joined by the chairman of Barlaston's Action Group, John Plant.
Well, it's really been quite frightening in a way, because it's been like David and Goliath. The frightening thing hasn't been so much that you were knocking your head against a brick wall, but more that you were knocking your head against a soft sponge. You never got any reply, you just got an acknowledgement from a letter, and it's always been a case of we've had to find out things first and then confront the county council and the Department of the Environment with them before they would reluctantly admit to the facts that we've put before them.
The enemy really is people who look at a map in London and draw a line on it, and don't even bother to come and have a look at the route. Now, I realise these people have got, a lot of things to do, but it seems to me that, if you can sort of cover a countryside with concrete by just drawing a line across a map, then there's something wrong with it.
One step up, the parish councils serving both sets of villages have fought long and hard, for their obviously different reasons, to get a decision on the motorway. But here in Stafford, where we are now, the county council couldn't, or it seemed to the villagers, wouldn't help. The county surveyor, Jack Shelbourne.
Well, first of all, it must be appreciated that the county council is not the authority preparing any motorway scheme in this area. That responsibility rests with the director of the road construction unit at Leamington. Having said that, let me tell you what the county council have done. They and I consider it absolutely vital, always have done, that the public participation stage should be reached as quickly as possible. And I see from my file that in March 1972, they forecast that proposals would be published in the autumn of that year, so that was autumn of 1972. Well, the autumn came and went and nothing happened, and in March 1973 I wrote again to the director of the Midland Road Construction Unit saying what was the form and when would proposals be published, and he then said that the proposals were unlikely to be published before early 1974. So early in 1974 I duly went back to him again, and he then forecast that it was not likely to be until April of 1975. So April of 1975, by which time my committee and I were getting heartily fed up with the matter, invited the Deputy Director of the Midland Road Construction Unit to come along and tell them exactly when public participation would take place. And he forecast that it would then be in the autumn of 1975. And just to confirm that opinion, no less a person than the Right Honourable Fred Mulley MP, who was then Minister for Transport, said yes, in his opinion, the autumn of 1975 would be the time when plans would be laid before the public. Well, as we all know now, the autumn of 75 in its turn came and went and nothing happened. And you can imagine my disappointment and my committee's at really this, as I see it, masterly inactivity. And as I understand it, the latest forecast then was that it would be in the spring of 1976. It is now the spring of 1976, and so far as I'm aware, no date has yet been set for this public participation stage. But I think that history, which I hope I haven't bored you with, will show that we have been doing everything we possibly can to get these vital plans before the public.
That's cold comfort for the residents of Tittenser and Barlaston. Would you be in favour now, since they're already suffering some form of planning blight, they're all convinced there's going to be a motorway spur and it's going to go through their villages, would you recommend that there should be publication at this stage, regardless of how far the Midland Road Construction Unit has got on with its proposals?
As I understand it, the main reason for delay in publication revolves around difficulties at the eastern end of the route and not so much the western end. And for the life of me, I can't see really why the length of the route which affects Staffordshire could not be published tomorrow.
It's also cold comfort for the residents of Teene and the other villages along the A50 who were, I think, first promised relief in 1938.
Well, of course, the existing A50 must be one of the worst lengths of trunk road in the country, and it has been crying out for relief for the last 20 or 30 years.
So knowing the problems as you do, all this must make you feel, well, how does it make you feel?
I think the word is frustrated.
The focus of Jack Shelbourne's frustration is in Leamington Spa, and that's where we've come, to the Midland Road Construction Unit, directed for the Department of the Environment by Alan Brandt. We asked him first for his verdict on the problems of Tean and Checkley.
It's bad enough to justify the construction of an alternative road for both Tean and all the other villages along there, connecting from the M1 right through to the M6, in my opinion.
But why has it taken so long? The villagers were first promised relief in 1938. Even the county council say they've been pressing for 15 years. And a route for the motorway was originally promised, so the county council say, for publication in autumn 1972.
Yes, we were fairly happy about the design of this road at one stage, but in fact the predicted growth of traffic on our road system means that we have had to look again at the design of the roads, at the standard of the roads, and at the corridor that the proposed road should take.
But speaking particularly from the point of view of the villagers near Tean, they thought they were getting relief in 1938.
Yes, now this is a difficult problem because essentially our main difficulties have not been in the Tean area. They have been more associated with the problems that we've had on the eastern side of this section of 42 miles.
Is there definitely going to be a new road then?
In my opinion, there'll be a new road, yes.
In these times, of course, the routes, whatever they are, have to be made economically attractive, a point I think you'd agree with. That means there may be no alternative. There mightn't be a bypass anyway. So we're back to a motorway. The question, once again, is when, and why haven't people been kept aware of what is happening?
Well, the difficult problem here is that when you're thinking in terms of a route something like 42 miles long, the breadth of the corridor that you're investigating is something in the order of 15, 20 miles. And the area of blight that you would be covering is, in my opinion, quite out of the question to put them in the picture immediately.
But isn't the fact that there is already blight there? People who've got properties there are scared stiff at the moment.
Yes, but then individual people don't know exactly how it's going to affect them, and they can't be specific, and nobody really knows. I think it's better to leave it that way until we have put the whole thing to the public. If we had, as it were, come clean in the very beginning, a lot of people might have objected.
We're back in the area of communications again. For both sets of villages, people just don't know what's going on. And you may promise various things, but promises have been made in the past that haven't been kept. Promises have been made to Tean and Checkley since 1938.
Yes, I've been responsible for making some of them too, and I regret that I haven't been able to keep them. Nevertheless, as far as I'm concerned, I have to be sure that the alternative routes that I'm putting forward are viable solutions to the problem that I've been posed.
But since you've been wrong before, how do you know you won't be wrong again?
Well, let's hope that this time, within about 4 months, I shall be able to put to the public the alternative solutions to the problem.
Does that mean that the people of Barlaston and Tittinsor are going to know within 4 months what all the various route possibilities are in their area?
Yes, yes indeed.
And how long, for all the villagers concerned, before their problems are solved or at least alleviated?
Oh, now that depends on when the road is built, of course, and open to traffic. Now, if the minister selects a particular route, then I can proceed with all this statutory processing which has to go on, and this can take another 10 years.
So the problem, or the buck as the villagers would have it, is passed on yet again, this time right up to the Department of the Environment. So down we went to London, to the department's headquarters, 3 huge new tower blocks overlooking Parliament.
And there we asked the Minister of State with special responsibility for roads and planning, Kenneth Marks, whether he was satisfied with the way things had been handled as far as Tean and Checkley and Tittinsor and Barlaston were concerned.
I think on the whole we've moved pretty quickly. But anybody who is affected, directly affected by a road, will think that that house and that particular spot on that particular road is the most important in the country. And to them, it is. Let's face it. But we have to look at an entire national plan, we have to look at priorities, we have to look at the need for the road as a whole, as well as the bypassing of particular villages.
Would you concede that in this case it's taken too much time and that there's too much secrecy surrounding it?
Well, of course, in various parts of the country, provision has been made since the 1930s for certain roads. I've just approved one in Plymouth where there's a gap been left through what was going to bypass Plymouth, and as now Plymouth has been built round it. And I've approved that only recently. That's been waiting since 1936.
Do you think the department would have moved rather more swiftly, as some of the villagers suspect, if a minister had actually lived along the route?
No, I certainly don't think that. Not if my own experience is anything to go by anyway.
But, Minister, you almost seem to be suggesting, when you were talking about delays going back to 1936 in a case you mentioned, and in 1938 in Teen and Checkley, that this was not at all unusual and was almost accepted.
Well, it's a fact. It's not whether it's accepted or not. It's something that's there.
However, do you think there are lessons to be learned from the problems which this programme has illustrated about communicating with people to make them feel, along this process, however long it legitimately has to be, that they are not being ignored and left out?
There is now far more consultation, far more listening to the public and talking to the public than there's ever been. In some countries, they simply decide one route, and it's only a question of arguing the compensation. If we took it further at this stage, I'm sure the blighting would be more.
But many of the residents of Tittenser and Barlaston already feel that they're covered by a sort of blight, because most people know that the road is going to go somewhere through Tittenser and Barlaston.
Well, most people, if you're saying we're being secret, most people don't know that. In fact, I don't know it.
The question then, of course, is when you hope to build the motorway, are they going to get a motorway?
One of the problems is the continual pressing of officials and of ministers for information, and of trying to give as much as you can, and later being accused of making promises that couldn't be carried out.
But there definitely is going to be a major new trunk road of some sort along that corridor.
We shall improve the communications between Stoke and Derby to a great extent. I've been particularly cagey about any promises I have made since I came into this office 4 months ago. But I think I can say with confidence now that we're going to get the public consultation on this year. And the final decision on what we do will depend on the public consultation, whether we have a motorway, dual carriageway road, or series of bypasses. We've got to listen to the public on this and then decide later.
Do you think the villagers will be satisfied with that answer?
No, I don't think the villagers will be satisfied until large lorries stop going past their houses and stop hitting their houses. But at the same time, we have to listen to everyone else concerned, do this public consultation, and take notice of it. It does take time.
And so far it's taken 38 years for the villagers of Teen and Checkley, who've chosen Joyce Plant and Norman Heathcote to have the last word on their behalf.
We have had a fair hearing from the BBC. We've had a fair hearing on the Barlaston side. But let us make one point clear, that never at any time would I wish to put our problems onto Barlaston or Tittenser.
It's very nice to know that the line for the motorway will be coming out within the next few months, but we've heard this so many times. So many promises have been broken.
Promise, 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 promise. Promise at every verse end. Now, if we're not going to get anything done, much as I've been against this in the past, I'm afraid that militant action will creep in from other people and there'll be no holding them back.
I think militant action, to some people, is the only answer. They think that if you're going to get anything in this day and age, you've got to be militant.
Make a damn nuisance of yourself and make the most noise and you will be heard. And we will make noises by this programme or any other to get the M64 started off as soon as possible.
Norman Heathcote and Joyce Plant.
Meanwhile, for Barlaston and Tittenser, John Plant, no relation, and Malcolm Johnson for their and our last word.
I think we've been accused of indifference to the problems of Teen and Checkley. I think this is quite wrong. I think we know exactly what they've been putting up with, and indeed many of us travel this road to Derby ourselves and know the conditions on this road. But we feel that what Teen needs is either a bypass or, better still, a multi-purpose road, this would be a quick solution and, we think, the right solution for all sides.
The case as it has been presented in the programme has brought to life the problems which, for many people, have long since been submerged in the mountain of paperwork and negative replies which they have received from various ministries. To actually hear the people who are making the decisions, to actually hear the minister comment and promise that public participation will take place in the near future. In fact, our experience in the past has been that these dates come and go, and we shall believe it when it happens. Of course, the problem in politics is that very often ministers haven't the time, or in fact sometimes don't occupy the position long enough to make themselves fully acquainted with the facts. And therefore, there is a possibility that ministers will be called upon to make decisions on subjects which they know very little about and will have to rely on the advice of experts. And this is my main worry, that in fact the M64 may be built for the wrong reasons or for reasons other than those that are stated by the departments.
Time for Action with Roger Cook and Nick Ross was compiled by Roger Cook, Nick Ross and Sally Diplock. It was produced by Richie Cogan.